All right, we're back here with Jared. We've been on a couple times. Let's see. I think we've done one solo interview, and then we had one that we did with Jack as well. So today we brainstormed a little bit of the things that we were wanting to talk about. One of the things in our conversations that we frequently come back to and circle to is, well, axiology in general, right? So what is the nature of value? I've been kind of interested in aesthetics also specifically, but we can get into all of that. Was there anything you wanted to start off with, or do you want me to give kind of a?
Just no. I mean, we're talking about aesthetics, but like I'm probably the worst person to talk to about aesthetics. Just personality-wise, some people have very strong aesthetic experiences, and I just really don't. I don't really listen to music. If I'm driving in the car, I prefer silence.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I go to an art museum, I'm like, well, that was nice, and then I can be fine not doing that for another couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of funny. I mean, I do have this interest in it, but you actually experience the aesthetic in a way that you find moving, whereas it's very rare for me to have that kind of experience.
Well, I mean, that might not be a bad thing for us here, since in a way, just the raw aesthetic experience, there might not be much of a motivation to get very analytical about it and try to break it down. Okay, what is it that is actually happening here? It'd just be kind of like, oh yeah, that was great. Enough said. I mean, in a way, if we all agreed on our aesthetics experiences or judgments, there would probably be less of a motivation for the discipline entirely. I mean, we'd probably still get a little bit into it, but it wouldn't be as, so, we have, there's the philosophical conversations of, oh, do we all perceive color in the same way? Which I guess, of course, we don't, because we have color blindness. But setting that aside, like, okay, under normal circumstances, do I perceive blue when I have the qualia, or the quality of blue? Is that the same as your quality of blue? And we could get into that, but that's pretty theoretical, and no one really has major disagreements about it outside of those very wonky discussions. Whereas with aesthetics, there really are disagreements, even among people who aren't trying to be philosophical, just people out there enjoying movies or music and saying, oh yeah, that movie was great. Oh no, it sucked. I hate it. And if without some kind of way of getting a little bit more systematic about it, that may be as far as it gets. But I don't know, do you feel like you can break it down a little bit more into, or does it, I guess I have a few questions there. One is like, okay, do you think it's part of a personality type relating to the sensitivity to aesthetic experience or having those experiences? And then also, do you get into that of like breaking it down? Okay, I noticed that other people say this is good for this and that reason, and I can observe these common features between them.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that it's only one answer. I think it's just a very complex mixture of a whole bunch of different things. And I certainly take the psychological approach because that's my background. My bachelor's was in psychology, and my master's was in behavioral and decision sciences, and now I do behavioral science consulting. So I very much view it from the psychological point of view. And I think that beauty itself seems to stem from, at least in part, from evolutionary needs. Like, we view snow-capped mountains as very beautiful, and swamps with dirty water not so much. And there's a reason for that. Snow runoff is great water source. Like, you should be attracted to that. You should seek out things that are beautiful. Like, evolution kind of leveraged our sense of beauty to get us to to survive. But that's certainly not the full extent of it. In psychology, there's also something called the mere exposure effect, where you just repeatedly expose someone to some stimulus. For example, that could be the characters in it could be like kanji, right? Like Japanese writing. And like after a while, you're gonna like the characters that you've seen before, you're gonna find more aesthetically pleasing and beautiful. So just having seen it before, like, and I don't know exactly why that is. Maybe it's something like you've seen it before, and you know it's safe.
So that's called mere exposure effect?
Yes.
Okay. Very interesting.
Yeah. Just even the like people you see more often, you'll find more attractive. So there's also this, so there's, you know, this biological approach, there's this, you know, environmental approach, and then I think there's perhaps like two other approaches, which might be like, one is like meaning, right? Like if you're looking for a specific answer, or if you have, how do you put it? You know, it's something like, you know, sometimes music speaks to you on a sort of spiritual level or something like that, right? And by you, I very much mean you, because this doesn't happen to me.
Yeah, me personally. Okay, yeah.
But you know, sometimes like there's meaning behind the art or the beauty that can speak to you, and that doesn't seem to be either biological or mere exposure. That seems to be a third phenomenon, and perhaps there's a fourth, you know, that has to do with, you know, kind of a cultural, you know, some sort of construct. You know, understanding the rules of some construct can help inform, but I think that has to be related to mere exposure, but I'm not sure either.
Yeah. So what were those four again? You said evolution, environment. Were those the first two?
Yeah.
Evolution, environment,
exposure,
and then there's
meaning.
Yeah, like the thing in itself, kind of the meaning, and then culture.
Yeah, and
yeah, which is kind of like environment, but
yeah,
I can see the distinguishment there too.
But I'm not sure how much overlap there is. I'm not entirely positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there seems to be like, I that's exactly what I was thinking. There have to be multiple sources there. So, for example, as we were kind of talking about this, I was reviewing a little bit of Steven Pinker's book, The Blank Slate, and I saw a TED Talk where he had been talking about basically how in trouble he got for writing the book and how controversial it was. And I think he said that it was the chapter on the arts that he was getting the most vitriol and pushback from. Like, you know, stay in your area, don't touch the humanities. You're a hard sciences guy, and you don't understand this stuff. But basically, along with the rest of his book, kind of saying, okay, human nature matters. We're not blank slates. That we have all of these faculties that we carry along with us from birth, and if you try to impose things that aren't really compatible with human nature onto humans, it's not going to work out well. And kind of the idea that certain strains of the arts that suffer and don't get much popular support, that there may be a reason for that because of human nature. And I think that could be kind of true, but still there are certain schools of the arts that I think people do have genuine aesthetic appreciations for, even if they're not as popular, right? So I think of serialism and ultra serialism in music. I think there's a lot of bad versions of it, but then there are also some good ones. So I think Arthur Schoenberg was pretty good at it. Although when people first hear it, it's definitely weird, right? It may not be something that conforms to what, as products of evolution, we would naturally be inclined to appreciate, but maybe by repeated exposure, maybe by being embedded into a culture where we learn certain norms of aesthetic judgment, we come to appreciate, and then we actually can have aesthetic experiences of it. So I think there's a little bit of both there. I mean, so like you were talking about the snow-capped mountains versus the muddy waters. I mean, there's definitely got to be some. We're made up of material, and there's something to start with, right? That makes us have aesthetic experiences in the first place, right? I think Pinker's right. We're not blank slates, but our slates, our chalkboards, are completely full. Either we can still add to them. We can add stuff to them. So I guess it's not completely an either or there. Not that Pinker would say it was, but just to use him kind of as a foil.
I think it was Brett Weinstein. He said something that I always really liked, was that, you know, humans are not blank slates, but we are the most blank slate animal.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's you know, that's the function of culture, right?
Yeah.
And culture really is kind of like our extended brain.
Yeah, I'd almost think of it as like maybe the part of our slate that is already filled in, maybe similar in size to other animals, but then our slates are a lot bigger. So we have a lot more room to write other stuff on.
That might actually be a really interesting way to put it. I like that. You know, it's kind of the extended mind hypothesis, right? But yeah, I mean, culture really is. I can't remember who said it, but you know, someone has talked about culture sort of like a cloud, like a kind of like the internet cloud, right?
Yeah.
Store data on the cloud, and culture is kind of like that. You store information in culture, and so it's very much an extended part of who we are.
Yeah. Now, I want to go back a little bit to personality, because I'm intrigued by, you know, you talked about your lack of aesthetic experiences. And I understand it, because I do think you do have some, but maybe I just understand them a little differently. So like, to bring up the really hot button issue, Star Wars, right? Okay, so I mean, you have some opinions on Star Wars movies and their quality of different episodes and all of that, right?
Yeah, of course. Who doesn't? Yeah,
right. You do. Now, where do those come from? Are those automatic responses, or is it kind of in response to what other people are saying?
Yeah, I don't want to exaggerate my case, right? Like, I'm sure it's a spectrum, and I think I'm just a little bit lower on the spectrum than other people, where it's just like, you know, I'm fine if I haven't, you know, listened to music in a month.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even occur to me that music is a thing that I might be listening to. And so it might be particularly music, but that's not to say I don't ever like music. When I saw Lion King, I saw the play Lion King, at like the ASU whatever theater.
Yeah, Gamage. Yeah, I saw it in Gamage too.
And you know, there's that Rafiki opens up Lion King with and immediately that caused me to tear up.
Okay, yeah.
Immediately, like within like 3 seconds, I was just like a little bit, right? And I'm like, that was absolutely shocking to me that something like that was even possible. So it's not that I'm not ever moved by music. Like, I certainly have been, but you know, we've talked about this elsewhere, but you know, I think I'm a little bit higher on alexithymia than other people.
I'm glad you brought it up, because I couldn't remember the term. So I was wondering if it was related.
Yeah, so alexithymia is basically like an inability to recognize your own emotions.
Okay.
Spectrum. And I don't consider myself alexithymic, but I do consider myself higher on that spectrum than most other people.
Okay.
And it's very hard for me to realize what it is I'm feeling. And I have to very consciously think about it. I have like a little emotional wheel that I keep on my phone. And when I feel something and I'm like, I don't know what emotion it is that I'm feeling, I go to my phone, open up my little picture and say, okay, which of these list of emotions best represents what I feel? And that's been really useful for me in trying to understand, okay, when I feel tightness in my chest, that means it's this emotion. But it's taken me a while to really get there.
Yeah. And emotion seems to be an essential part of it. I don't even know if we would be having, if we would have a discipline of aesthetics if it weren't for emotions, or even axiology for that matter. I don't know if we would have
absolutely
ethics without emotions. That I'll have to think about that. But so like Immanuel Kant, he's probably the one I've read the most on aesthetics. So he had basically two responses that he analyzed that were the beautiful and the sublime. So beautiful is when things are, there's a response to things being concordant and all fitting together and harmoniously and nicely. And then the sublime is kind of the opposite, but when things are just overwhelming. So like there's disharmony and things aren't, our ability to see things in an ordered way is just overwhelmed. And there's kind of this experience of, it's kind of a mix of awe and terror, but also something that we respond to well, but that's another one that he put together. But both of those I would say are emotional things, but being Immanuel Kant, he just got very analytical about it. Makes me wonder about his personality too, what he was like, if he was trying to think like, okay, wow, what is this I'm feeling here? And then he had to analyze it and write it down and write books about it.
I do think it's primarily an emotional experience. Emotion is another topic I'm interested in, but that I don't feel that I have a good handle over. Like, what I was going to mention earlier was, decision making without emotion is sort of a subfield, and like without emotion, it's like you have some sort of brain damage that causes you to basically like not feel emotion. Like you don't make decisions, right?
Right.
Because you're basically a computer and you're like computing all of this information, but if you don't have like any value, because I think value and emotion are fundamentally connected, there's no actual criteria for you to make the decision on, right? So in decision theory, right, in order to make a decision, you have the probability, you have your values, and you have your value weights.
Oh, okay.
And like you might know consciously what your values are, and you might know what the probabilities are, but I think emotions kind of tie into the emotional or the value weights. That it's like, if the value itself doesn't have any weight, like how are you going to make a decision?
That reminds me. So like, I'm always looking when I'm reading in scripture, I'm always looking for philosophical insights as well that maybe aren't necessarily devotional in nature, but so in 2 Nephi 2, so this is the Book of Mormon. I'm trying to find the part where it talks about this, but so it's the need of opposition in all things. One of the ways I read it is that, okay, here it is. So this is 2 Nephi chapter 2, verse 16, wherefore the Lord God gave unto man that he should act for himself, wherefore man could not act for himself, save it should be that he was enticed by one or the other. That's a verse that has made me think of an idea similar to what you're saying, right? That there wouldn't be any actions unless there was some type of enticement. And then enticement is something I read at that emotional level, that more immediate level, that okay, even if we have all the knowledge, there's got to be something that draws us in some way.
I'm reminded that there's a certain fish, which I can't remember the name of, but it doesn't have any natural predators. And so like for the first half of its life, it's just like a normal fish. And then at some point it attaches itself to a rock. I think it's a sea squirt maybe or something like that. And then it cannibalizes its own brain. Right? Because if it doesn't have any natural predators, what do you need a brain for?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? If there's not any opposition, if there's not anything you're trying to fight against, for what do you need intelligence?
Fascinating. Yeah, and I guess a brain is a major expenditure of energy, and there's a lot of nutrition there that you could be using in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's funny. Okay. I want to get to in a little bit the meaning part of this, but I just saw one note that you had made as we were brainstorming here about how beauty will save the world. Is that something you're prepared to get into? I don't even know what you meant by that, but it's just struck me as interesting.
So, have you seen or read Cloud Atlas?
I've seen the movie. Should I read the book? Is it a good book?
It is. It's
That's
good.
your aesthetic judgment. Cool.
And it's a long book, but
how long are we talking? Like,
it's not long for you. It's
okay.
Long, not for a Todd.
Oh, okay.
There's a YouTube channel called like Stories of Old, which if you enjoy philosophy, it is. I love that channel. It's so good.
Yes, I love those types of channels in general. I want to get more into them. Actually, as we were before, sorry, I don't need to derail you, but before we got onto our call here, I was just testing out my audio system and everything, and so I clicked on a random YouTube channel it had come up in my suggestions, and it was one about Titanic. And who is that one by? I'll just mention it here since that one's by Lindsay Ellis. So she's one who does those types of videos as well. But anyway, sorry. Stories of Old, Cloud Atlas.
Of Old, he reviews various movies, but he goes into the philosophy behind the movies, right? And so he did a video on Cloud Atlas that, like, the first time I saw Cloud Atlas, I was like, I just don't get it. Like, what's going on? Is it like this reincarnation thing? I don't understand it. And then I watched this like Stories of Old, and I was like, wow, that was really great. Went back and watched the movie, and like suddenly it just made sense. First time, the aesthetic experience was very low. After watching this video, and I understood the meaning behind it, aesthetic experience was amazing. And now I really like the movie. And he kind of argues, and I believe it's a Dostoevsky quote, that the movie is essentially about how beauty will save the world. Because what the movie is it takes place over, I think, there's 6 different people over 6 different time frames. And every person is inspired by the story that someone wrote or the book of the person before them, right? So the first person writes a journal, and the next person is so inspired by that journal that he writes a piece of music. And so that music in the future, that music is so beautiful that it inspires a story. And that story is so beautiful that, and so the art, like the art begets art, and it inspires everyone throughout the whole story. And so it was beauty will save the world. Like the pieces of art inspired the characters to do these, like the noble things that they did. Mm-hmm. To the point at the very end where basically the art had become a religion, which I won't spoil it too much, but at some point the art kind of transcends art to become something very sacred. Mm-hmm. So Dostoevsky says like beauty will save the world, and I believe I think it's in The Idiot, the book The Idiot.
Oh, okay.
Which for those not familiar with the book, the premise basically was, like, Dostoevsky wasn't setting out to write a great novel. He was trying to figure something out, which was, what if someone perfectly lived like Christian values, and you just put them into society? Like, what would happen? And so he writes the story of this guy who is just very trusting. He's a dove, not a serpent, right? Mm-hmm. Just very trusting, very loving, gives everyone everything, and everyone takes advantage of him, but he's going to do what's right no matter what. And so he tries to figure out, like, if you put someone like this, someone just truly beautiful on the inside, into a society that's corrupt, how does society react to him? And so, and you're right, it's like beauty will save the world. Like this guy is just like so beautiful on the inside that he kind of redeems those around him in some way. Anyway, so
yeah,
kind of a long explanation, but that's what I mean by beauty will save the world. That
right.
The beautiful things that we do inspire others. Like the connection between beauty and morality, like I'm not entirely sure what the difference is. I sometimes think that line is a lot thinner than we like to think. And so I like beauty will save the world. I think there's something really meaningful and beautiful and true about that.
Yeah, well, and that convergence is a very Platonic idea. So Plato saw basically all things converging into the good. And then Plotinus also just called it the one. So I like that idea of all of that converging. I saw Cloud Atlas. I saw the movie years ago. So this was probably 8 years ago or so. It was some international flight. I think it was probably from Singapore or something. So they had free movies, and that was one that I watched because I had plenty of time. And I remember thinking, this is interesting, but I didn't understand it either. So I'll have to go back and revisit it. I was actually listening to an episode on another podcast called The Partially Examined Life, which is a philosophy podcast. And they were reading Susan Sontag's article Against Criticism, and which is very pertinent to what we're talking about here. But and it was kind of like against criticism, as in like, okay, let's not everybody import your pet interests into every work of art. Like not everything has to be read through the lens of economic class or race or gender, but it seems like she was still into like, okay, bring out what is what people can appreciate about this. Point out things that maybe people who aren't really, if it's somebody's first exposure to something, things that they can notice that they wouldn't otherwise notice, right? If they're not trained in that. So like, you're reading or watching Cloud Atlas, unless it's a genre that you're really familiar with, you might not pick up those things and appreciate them. I read James Joyce's Ulysses, which is a crazy book. And I would have been totally lost. But I was reading it along with commentary at the same time. And that definitely helped. I got a lot more out of it that way. So I'm definitely in favor of that type of criticism and commentary, just for the purpose of education. Actually, on the subject of beauty will save the world, have you seen the Hamilton video yet?
I just watched Hamilton for the first time yesterday. Okay,
me too. Were you familiar with the soundtrack? Had you listened to it before?
I hadn't.
Oh, okay, great. So I knew the soundtrack already. I'd listened to it several times. So I focused on different elements like the choreography and the display of emotion and the facial expressions and that. But as the movie was ending, the main thought I had was that, wow, this is what America needs right now. Like, wow. And I thought the same thing because Hamilton was out in 2016, also a very divisive time. And PBS had done this special where they were just talking about the play, and they interviewed all these people, and they interviewed a lot of politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, and just talking about the play, but then also just about the story behind it and the founding of America. And they got into, like they interviewed the actor who played Thomas Jefferson, who's hilarious. I love him. And he was talking about Jefferson's flawed character, but also his greatness. and what it's like to, as a Black man, especially to play Thomas Jefferson, and that experience, which I found very interesting. But anyway, I remember in 2016 watching that PBS special, thinking, "Wow, this is a very unifying message." I feel like, wow, America actually can come together around things. And so I was delighted to see the play coming out on streaming on Disney Plus. That I hope a lot of people do watch it, because I definitely feel something as I'm watching it, because there's a troubled history to the United States. Definitely, I definitely can't deny that. But there's something glorious about it as well, and I felt that when I was watching the play, and how it ends with as he's about to die and he's going through the whole cycle of his life again, and the legacy that he's leaving, and leaving the country, and to us to carry on, and definitely felt something. I guess an aesthetic experience, but also a patriotic experience, which probably part of the same thing.
Yeah. I brought this up to you like last year around this time. I think it was 4th of July. So my wife and I were living out in Philadelphia. And well, back then I actually wasn't there, it was just me. But so for 4th of July, I went out to Old City, which is, very patriotic.
Mm-hmm.
Our house now is, like, if you're looking at Betsy Ross, the lady who designed the American flag, you look at her house and there's a brick building on the right, like that's our apartment building, right? And like Benjamin Franklin's house is a block from there, and his grave as well. And Liberty Bell's like 2 or 3 blocks away. Very patriotic area. And so I was there for 4th of July last year, and I went to this concert that was on the pier. And I think it was the Air Force. It was like 4 people from the Air Force. And I think it was 2 guys and 2 girls. And I can't remember if any of them were white, but at least some of them definitely were not. I think there was like a Black girl, a white girl, a Latino man, and I think there was a 4th member who I can't even remember. And I remember sitting there, and like I was looking around, and there were people of all races and ethnicities around me, and all were dancing and singing to the music, and it was all these I think it was all cover songs. And I saw these little girls at the very front, right? It was like 3 or 4 little girls, and like white and Black, and they were reaching up to try and touch the singer, who was this lady, and the girl reached down, touched their hands, and they were just like, I touched her, and then they ran away. And I realized at that moment, like, actually these little girls didn't know each other, right? They had just like congregated together so that they could touch the singer in that one moment. And it was such an aesthetic experience where I was just like, wow, like this is America.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I want to defend. And like, it's such propaganda, right?
Yeah.
It's propaganda. There was like military band, but it really helps me like think about like, what is it that like we value as a country? What is it that we want? And the sort of like multiculturalism that all came together in that one moment. And we're listening to all genres of music, and just like all kinds of people, very different from each other, and not just racially, but like in every possible dimension you could imagine, I'm sure. And it was just so beautiful. And I was like, this is the thing that we have to defend,
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of had that experience as well when I was listening to or watching Hamilton yesterday, where I was just like, this is a complete retelling. This is the myth of Hamilton, right? It's not trying to be like super accurate, where it's like, all of the actors are white men, and if you're Black, you're a slave. It wasn't going for accuracy in that sense. It was just saying like, look, America has this great tradition over here, but we also have these new values, and can we marry those and make it into a thing? And I just thought that was so beautiful. And I was like, wow, like it would be amazing if we could be better at uniting the narratives. Right now, it's like the conservatives have their narratives, and the liberals have their narrative, and we can't figure out how to get them to mesh. Like Hamilton did that really well.
Yes.
Wish there was more like that.
Yep. Yep. Definitely. And yeah, I would love to see more along those lines. So I totally appreciate what Manuel Miranda and the whole cast together. I mean, I think that's what I was thinking. It's like, wow, this would take a ton of work and a ton of people collaborating to bring this together. But that was the first thing I thought of when you said, when we were talking about art can save the world, that it was just such a, on two levels, right? So it was like definitely an immediate reaction that it just felt really good. But then also like, as a production, there's definitely a lot of skill that went into it, right? And it probably wouldn't have been as effective if it didn't have all that skill. I remember I was in Toastmasters. Have you ever heard of Toastmasters? So it's like a speakers
right, yeah,
group, and it was one of these. I wouldn't have done it on my own, but it was one of these things that was like it had been suggested like in an employment review or something like that, as like just a way of developing interpersonal skills and that sort of thing. Yeah. So anyway, I went to Toastmasters, and there was a guy who was kind of I think he was the president of the Toastmasters Club, and he was he's a really great guy, and it had done like all these training and classes and other things as well, and was helping all of us. But I saw on Facebook after Hamilton came out that he was pointing out all these things in the diction and in the consonants that were used, and how there were a lot of repeated popping consonants and I guess he made these similarities to Shakespeare, just things that I'd never noticed before. I was like, oh yeah, I could see how that totally would be effective, how it would drive that rhythm and really move the energy along. And so I think of, I've had conversations on this subject where it's like, okay, well, how can you really say if something good or not? Like, is it just completely subjective? And on the one hand, yeah, it is subjective, because there have to be subjects to be able to respond to it. Going back to Immanuel Kant again, he described the aesthetic judgment as a subjective universal. So it's like, yeah, it is subjective, but it's also, there's something common across all people. So he's getting a little bit from both sides on that. But I also think there are some objective side of that, and that's I had noted down the different levels you had mentioned. So on the meaning side of it, meaning, or I would say objective also. What is it that we're grasping towards? Is there something beyond just what's in environment, just what's been given to us by our biological makeup, just what's been given to us by culture? Is there something beyond all of it? Is that kind of what you were meaning by meaning? Meaning by meaning.
I'll give an analogy, or rather, I'll recommend another YouTube video. There's that video by Benjamin Zander,
okay.
Z-A-B-E-R, called "The Transformative Power of Classical Music." It's a TED Talk.
Oh, is that the one where he plays the Chopin piece?
He plays the piece, whether it's Chopin.
Oh, okay. I remember there's the one buttock cheek playing. Yes. Is it that one? Where that's how you know when he's really getting into it.
And so what I really like about that video, so he's playing the piano. And it's classical music, which like is just hard for me to really understand. But as he's playing, he says, like, when I play this note, that means it's sad. And he plays it, and I'm like, wow, yeah, that is sad.
Yeah.
I never realized that, right?
Right.
There's meaning there in the music. But until someone had pointed it out to me, I didn't understand that meaning. But once I understood it, I appreciated it. I was like, wow, that was a really beautiful piece. But if I hadn't understood the meaning behind the notes, I just don't have that same reaction.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, so it didn't even feel sad to you before that was pointed out?
I mean, maybe,
Or you
but
didn't recognize it as such?
yeah, I mean, I just didn't recognize it as such. Like, I can recognize that something is sad, but like, I don't, I don't, I don't know. Maybe I'm not doing his spiel justice, because I mean, he does a little bit more than that, you know, because it's not just any individual note that's sad. It's
Right.
there's a pattern to it,
Mm-hmm.
and the pattern, like, it goes up and then it goes down, and that you're supposed to be happy and then sad, and there's a, I don't know, just understanding that better really helped me appreciate it. Whereas before it's just like kind of like, yep, it's sad, but like, I don't know. When I try to imagine like what is this music actually representing, it's just like a sad Looney Tunes cartoon or something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah.
Like black and white Looney Tunes cartoon. It's just like, I don't know, and it just doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
But the way he explained it, I was like, oh wow, yeah, like I get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that strikes me as some of that subjective universal there that at least let's say for the sake of argument that everyone in the world can sense it as sad regardless of what culture they're from. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but if that were the case, that would be something where like the sadness response. I don't think that could be something that would exist without subjects, except in potentiality, right? That if there were entities constituted the way they are, they would respond in this way. But for it to be actualized, there have to be subjects such as us to respond to it. But there's still the structure, and the structure of that sequence of notes has this universal effect on people that they respond in a certain way. So I think that's a subjective, a good example of the subjective universal that Kant was talking about, and it seems very plausible to me.
Yeah, it's plausible. I'm not sure. Like the fact that I didn't understand it before, like I don't know if that's something
Right.
peculiar to me. Like I don't know if, like, did I have the blank slate and then someone told me it and then
Mm-hmm.
that informed me, or was it like kind of like already implicitly there? I just wasn't recognizing it, and then watching the video helped me recognize it. But even then, like, it could still be culture.
Yeah.
This is the culture I'm
Yes.
which I've grown up.
Definitely could be.
I don't have. I'll say I don't have a strong opinion on which it is, and I'm not sure how you would even know which
Yeah,
one.
I mean that would be an interesting area of study to try and distinguish that and figure out which one. I would imagine there are people who are doing that work and have done that work.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I would be interested in it, but
Google Scholar.
yeah, I mean, probably the most we could say here, just in our armchair reflections, is that there are elements of both, and there are transitions between the two, but where they lie exactly, we can't really say without empirical data.
Yeah. Speaking of armchair speculation, I should clarify that when I say those four things, I made up those four things on the spot.
Yeah, no, I just like to know, and I'm writing them down. It's like, no, I just thought it was a good way to organize things. But
when you mentioned it, and maybe I've spent some time thinking about it in the past, but it's not any sort of systemized way of thinking about it.
that's quite all right. I wanted to mention, well, so two ideas, and these are some things that I've in our conversations with our group of friends that I've brought up. So a while ago, we were talking about modern concert music, and I had been reading some works by Roger Scruton, and he's kind of the view that kind of, I guess, more along the lines of Steven Pinker, that some of what is out there in modern concert music doesn't really conform to human nature, and fails on that front. And then Jacob rightly expanded my notion of the possibilities of modern concert music, and I think brought in a little bit more of those elements of the culture side and the acculturation of the aesthetic experience that these can be developed and tastes can be developed in ways beyond what would be natural. All right, I think there's something to the idea that there's value in developing taste and being educated in taste. Another thing he shared was these 5 common practices in music, in Western music anyway. So this was a book I haven't read yet, but you just referenced. I'll try and pronounce it. Dimitri Tomikso. And he wrote a book called The Geometry of Music, and he outlined 5 common practices that pop up. And I'll just list them off. So first is conjunct melodic motion. Second is acoustic consonance. Third is harmonic consistency, i.e. use of harmonies that are similar to each other. Fourth is limited macroharmony, i.e. pitches drawn from a relatively small set like a scale. And 5, centricity, i.e. certain notes are more important than others. Now those, I look at those and think, okay, those don't strike me as necessarily subjective. Like I think at least some of those could be abstracted from the subjective experience and just described in an objective way. Since, I mean, ultimately, the objective side of music is sound, or this motion of air, and that we can analyze it, we can break it down and see where pitches are, and we can look at the frequencies and overtones and get very much into the science of acoustics of how all that breaks down. And I think of that as kind of the objective side of music. And there do seem to be some things that you could break out that, okay, these are similar things that show up and seem to be effective, that we can set aside objectively, but then that they are appreciated is on the subjective side. And my whole reason for bringing that up is kind of this idea that there is something beyond just the subjective. So Arthur Schopenhauer talks about music or art bringing an appreciation of the Platonic forms, which as a Platonist I appreciate, but that maybe there is some objective side to all that, but it has to have the subjective also to have that element of appreciation. Anyway, so that's my ramble there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I understood some of those words. I don't know. I mean, I'm not enough of a Platonist, and my chief interaction with Platonism is through you. That I feel that I can fully grasp what it even means to be.
Yeah, and I'm probably not representative.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you're fairly materialist.
Yes.
I would describe you as a materialist that describes materialism in terms of Platonism almost.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Is there something objective? I don't know. That's beyond me.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, I mean, music seems like an especially fruitful area, and we won't have to get into that now, but just for future thought, music seems like an especially fruitful area for that, just because of the science of acoustics and how much that is developed. I've gotten a little bit into it. Most of my approach to music is just subjective, right? Just looking at it as an art form. But the acoustics is very interesting too. I mean, I am an engineer, so the physics behind it, I think, is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I tend to focus. My two interests are kind of psychology and axiology.
Yes.
And so I focus it on from that angle. What's the relation between beauty and morality and goodness, and then like what is it that we actually get from it? That goes back to the meaning aspect.
Yes. Another point that you had listed here so moral elevation and moral beauty from a secular and religious points of view. We've talked about the elevation, but do you have thoughts on the differences between the secular and religious? What were you had in mind there?
Yeah, so moral beauty is or moral elevation. I believe that I think Haidt is the one that's Jonathan Haidt has studied moral elevation, but I can't remember. I think it may have been Benjamin Franklin that actually coined the term. I can't recall exactly, but the way Jonathan Haidt explains it is it's an expanding in the chest. It's when you see someone do something really great, when you see someone do like give their life for someone else, there's an expanding in the chest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he uses a whole bunch of language that I'm like, that is very religious language. That was the language I grew up hearing from over the pulpit.
It sounds like burning in the bosom.
Yeah.
Sorry, so this is Haidt that was talking about this?
Yeah, Jonathan Haidt.
Okay.
Famous psychologist, for those who don't know. He talks about how when you see someone do these beautiful things, you feel it's expanding in the chest and you want to do something yourself. You want to be a better person. So this goes back to the idea that beauty will save the world, right? Mm-hmm. Someone does this beautiful act of charity and you're like, wow, I'm so inspired. I want to do something as well. But yeah, I mean, he explains it. And the whole time I'm reading this, I'm like, my gosh, like this is what Mormons call the spirit, This is everything I was taught from the pulpit since I was a kid, and Haidt focuses on the behavioral side of it's less epistemology and I don't know, instrumental, or however you want to put that, or it's more about what is good and doing good than what is true.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
yeah.
The side of that.
It reminds me of this exchange. Well, two experiences I had with a friend of mine, Grant, who I want to get on the podcast eventually. So he introduced me to this idea of kamamutta. Have you heard of that?
No.
So it's Sanskrit for moved by love. It's like a sudden feeling of oneness, of love, belonging, or union. But we both sent each other 2 videos back and forth where we've experienced that kind of elevation. So one he sent me, and these are both sort of political, but so one was, but regardless, that's how he responded to it. So the first one is Mitt Romney's speech during the Trump impeachment trial. But there was this moment of silence where Mitt Romney's talking, and he's talking about how he's a religious man, and then there's this very pregnant pause, and Grant said that he felt this elevation at that moment, and then recently I sent him a link to a video by Cornel West, and it was like Cornel West. He's a very, very engaging speaker. He's a philosopher, but kind of a preacher too. So he's a Christian, and I think he was speaking at a church. But it was one of those things as well where I just felt this this elevation. And so I definitely see that. And one reason I bring that up is because Grant's a kind of bit of a hybrid like me, but I guess more secular would be the primary strain of his thought. But definitely he appreciates that that side of things, that there is something in this elevation and beauty there. I had another thought, but I forgot what it was going to be. But yeah, I think there's definitely a potential there for having that secular experience as well, or even as a secular person having that elevation. And arts definitely can be instrumental to that.
There's an interesting connection between beauty and truth that I don't quite know how to navigate.
Okay.
But even outside of that, and just recognizing that just because you feel that moral elevation doesn't mean something is true. It
Mm.
can mean that you find something valuable, right? And so you have these aesthetic experiences or this moral elevation experience, which I don't know, you could argue that it's not an aesthetic experience, though I would argue it is, of listening to Mitt Romney give his speech, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, that might not be saying anything true about the world or about the universe or anything about how to get from is to ought. Uh,
Right.
but it still reveals something about what you value,
Yeah.
about the things that are beautiful and valuable to you. And maybe Mitt Romney is exemplifying those, or maybe it's that you you value that Mitt Romney, you value him as like an individual
Yeah.
expressing himself. Like it's hard to know exactly because I didn't have that same experience, but it still reveals something interesting about your own values, your own value structure, and how you think about things. And so, yeah, there's that.
Yeah. So, sorry, lost my train of thought there. Backing up a little bit. Oh, totally lost it. Where were we? Where were we just talking about? Okay, so values. Oh, yes, I remember what it was. Sorry. So it reminds me of religious experiences that people have and infer certain propositional truths from them. And I think maybe we try to infer a little bit too much from them, but that doesn't mean that there's not something there to get that is of truth. So I know this happens in like LDS Mormon religion. I think in evangelical Christianity, probably, and I've heard it in Islam too. Like just reading the Quran and having this experience, it's like, wow, no mortal could have written this, which is kind of similar to experience of the Book of Mormon, except it's not mortal. It's just like an uneducated farm boy couldn't have written this. So it's probably too far to go with having, like, say you just had a fireside and you felt that elevation and you think, well, this must mean X, Y, and Z. These propositions are true, that the Book of Mormon is historical. Jesus was resurrected. Joseph Smith saw God in Jesus Christ. I'm using the Mormon examples. Those things may be true still, but probably a little bit too far to infer just from that feeling of elevation, those things. Still, I think there are important things that are a little bit more immediate that you can more directly infer from those feelings of elevation. Maybe looking at the experience that you had. What was it? Was it a musical piece? Was it some life experience that a speaker shared in the meeting you were in, or was it this feeling of community? And I kind of think of like an EFY youth gathering, and there are probably a similar like youth camps in evangelical Christianity where like teenagers get together and have this shared experience. There are things there that are probably more immediately that we can infer from those things that are very true. Also, and that are more directly justifiable, that we can learn from them, and that are also very important, and maybe we should pay close attention to those things as well.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, and perhaps this is a little bit more personal than I'm comfortable sharing, but I'll do it anyways. For me, I think a lot about, so when I think about religion, and like, if I pray and ask, like, God, are you there? Like, largely, I don't feel anything. And, maybe this is because God speaks to me in the language I understand. And if I did feel something, I would have a very hard time saying, oh, that's evidence, because of the things we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
I would just be like, whatever it is I'm experiencing says more about my values than it does about truth,
Right.
And so when I pray about stuff like that, like I get nothing. But when I pray, and you can argue about whether this is actual prayer or meditation or something like that. But when I pray and think about, or just think about, what it is, like, where should I be? What should I be doing?
Mm-hmm.
Those answers feel a lot more clear, because it's like, those are my values. Like, this is a decision I've made. Like, I already made this decision. I know what I want. I know where I want to be. I know who I want to be with. I know who I want to like serve and what communities I want to be a part of. And so that answer feels a lot more clear to me. And I mean, perhaps it's because, like, for me, like, moral elevation, it doesn't make sense to me that it could be about truth. It has to be about values.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm influenced by Jonathan Haidt in that aspect.
Yeah.
And so but I have these moral elevating experiences, and it's like, well, I know where I want to be, and so I stay. And what that means as far as truth, like, I don't know. Like, and in some ways, I'm not overly concerned about it, though. I mean, but it's not true that I'm not at all concerned about it. But, like, you know, I'm comfortable where I am, and it's kind of more about values for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I guess we could say, like, what is the nature of the truth of those values? Is it something objective or constructed? Even if it is constructed, that seems important. Going back to Hamilton, like, well, you know, is the American experiment? It's interesting that we refer to it as an experiment. Actually, that's very provisional. But is America something that is absolutely true? And, you know, there is the perspective that America was established by God. The Constitution was ordained by God. I won't say one way or the other on that, but if we look at America as something that we've built, then the arts, like something like Hamilton, could be something of a kind of could definitely be conducive to rededicating us to the construction of that truth. There's a philosopher, Alain Badiou, who talks about constructed truths, and I'm not sure how I feel about a lot of his philosophy, but that's an interesting idea to me. That's something I can get on board with, and actually, it's something I've been thinking a lot about with America and patriotism. And I only bring this up in the context of Hamilton, but like the idea that it's not, well, it's the idea that America is not something that's all done and perfect, but it's something that we're continuously working on, and it's that unfinished project that is what it means to be patriotic and American, and that's what defines your patriotism and dedication. I think of also Martin Luther King. Is it the promissory note? The way he described the Declaration of Independence, like it was something that wasn't fulfilled at the time, but still needs to be cashed in. But anyway, so that's what I see. You know, like with Hamilton, it brings that idea out. It's like, okay, it's incomplete. There's a lot of work to do here, but it definitely makes me want to be a part of it, and gets me excited about it.
Yeah, but which makes me think that it's probably not objective.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't commit to that because I'm not entirely sure that values cannot be objective. But I tend to think they're very subjective and probably not universal even. You know, for me with like my religious experience, like it doesn't feel quite universal.
Mm-hmm.
There's something very personal about it. Like it is my decision, and it's not necessarily like from the point of view of the universe, or the point of view of like the collective values of humanity, or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's very much like, I feel like this is my decision. And I think that was a very important emotional, psychological, and spiritual stepping stone in my journey, was that like I had to take responsibility for my own spiritual experience. Um, Growing up in a religious household, like there's just kind of a default path that if you don't do anything else, you're just going to go along that path. Um, and leaving that path for the first time was actually an incredibly liberating experience. And I eventually came back, and we don't have to talk about that here, but I eventually came back and I was very happy with that decision. But you know, when I left the path, it was my decision. When I came back to the path, it was my decision. And that was extraordinarily important. It wasn't like, it wasn't anyone telling me, not even necessarily God telling me, though maybe, but regardless of whether anything spiritual or divine was involved, it was like, this is my choice. And that was an incredibly powerful and empowering experience, that, you know, this isn't the right way to phrase it, but like I've never recovered from it.
Yeah.
I've never gone back to how I was. And I've never gone back to the timid default path.
Right. It reminds me of the hero's journey. So it's like the idea of there's this return, right? So Frodo starts off, or Bilbo Baggins, they both start off in the Shire, right? And then they go off, they do their adventures, and then they both come back to the Shire. But then when they come back, they're different, right? Even though they're back where they started, they're really not back where they started in terms of their life journey. And maybe that's one of the big messages of the hero's journey, is that, you know, you're choosing where you get back to where you started, but it's deliberate.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that you brought up the hero's journey. I mean, it ties back together everything we've been talking about.
Yes, it does. That's why I brought it up.
I mean, and also, you know, I like Lord of the Rings.
Yep.
My favorite set of movies are the Lord of the Rings movies. I find them incredibly moving on multiple different dimensions, from a religious viewpoint, from a viewpoint of war, of goodness, and just aesthetic. I find them incredibly moving. But there is, you know, the call to action. There's always the reluctant hero. You know, Bilbo was very set in his ways, didn't want to go along with the dwarves and the Hobbit, right? And you know, but eventually he made the decision. It wasn't that Gandalf nudged him out the door, he says. But in the end, it was Bilbo's decision, despite Gandalf's libertarian paternalism there.
Very nice. Cool. Well, do you have anything else you want to talk about on these subjects, or?
We did promise, or we didn't promise, but I did want to bring up a point that we had talked about with Jack, not podcast, but online. We had talked about it. He brought up modern art.
Oh, okay.
And so I think modern art is interesting because it kind of ignores the universal. It ignores the evolutionary and biological, and it's sort of a blank slate project. Mm-hmm. So he posted a picture of a piece of art, and this is the piece of art. It is two clocks next to each other that are synchronized, like the kind of clocks that I grew up with, like in elementary school, that were hanging on an elementary school wall.
Yeah.
It's like that exact same clock, right?
Right. So nothing special. It's not like some ornate Swiss clock or something.
Just a clock that you could buy for $5 at Walmart.
Yeah. All right.
And it's these two clocks next to each other, and they're synchronized. And Jack was talking about how modern art is crap. I'll make him into a straw man because I can, and he's not here. Talking about modern art is crap.
We'll talk with him next time.
And so, and he posted that, and I went to the link and I saw this photo, and I actually had like a little bit of intake of breath. I was like, you know, not anything like excessive, but just like a little bit. Wow, because I immediately and intuitively understood what he was talking about. immediately I understood that it was existential.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately I understood that it was about two people. And like, that's amazing that someone could convey that,
Yeah.
could convey the existential experience of like, I didn't necessarily connect it to my wife at the time, but like, of like, my wife and I are gonna die someday. And like our time together is limited.
Mm.
And like he was that artist was able to convey that meaning with two ordinary objects. Like I find that incredibly powerful and not something that's easily replicated. Um, well, in the sense it could be easily replicated because anyone can throw it.
Right.
but to be able to convey such a nuanced and powerful thing with just two simple objects, and perhaps for me, art is most meaningful. Well, the the biggest aesthetic experiences I've ever had were when I understood the meaning of it, right? If I understand the meaning of the art, then I can have that powerful aesthetic experience. And if I don't have that meaning, it's just like, oh, those are some pretty mountains, But if there's like a meaning behind it, then I'm like, it just blows me away.
Yeah.
And so that's what I found so powerful. I mean, just two stupid clocks, so much. I don't think Jack appreciates that.
So yeah, I modern art I find very interesting, and I've mostly been on the musical side of that. I'm trying to get more into the what they used to call the plastic arts or the visual arts side of that, and I have a great course on it that I need to get into more. But a few stories. So one this might be apocryphal, but there's this story of Jackson Pollock, who a reporter came in to his studio and was saying, "Oh, you're just splashing stuff around. This doesn't take any skill at all." And then Pollock takes his paintbrush and flicks it and flicks a piece of paint, like a little piece of paint, right on the doorknob and says, "Get out." I don't know if that's true or not, but I love the story. Just the point being that maybe it looks random and chaotic, but the artist can be very, very deliberate about it. So like the artist with those two clocks, maybe even after the fact it'd be really easy to do, but just that somebody had put it together and was the first person to think of it and bring it up is artistic. And another thing I think of, and this is on the musical side, so I listened to a course by Robert Greenberg on 20th century music. And Robert Greenberg, he's a professor of music and composition, so he has lots of students and things. And he was talking about serialism, and so mid-century, it was like the big thing. And to people who've never been exposed to serialism, one piece, they may all sound the same. But he was saying there really is skill if you want to do it. There, like maybe 99% of the students who try it out just make crap. Like they're trying to just make something edgy and I guess transgressive of the expectations of human nature, but there's nothing really beyond that, right? And a lot of art, part of it is that, right? You're trying to deliberately transgress expectations of what human nature would naturally lead you to expect. But doing that well is very difficult. And so he said, as a professor, I had to sit through hours and hours of these mediocre compositions, serial compositions that were just horrible. But every now and then you get one that really was good. Like the person knew what they were doing. Like they'd move beyond the level of just like, oh, I'm going to do something that's totally transgressive and breaks through expectations and gone up a level and be like, okay, now I'm going to make something that's actually a great piece of art. But still, somebody who's not exposed to that tradition, and I would include myself in that, doesn't really understand all the details and how it's all put together, wouldn't be able to appreciate that. But I still think, as long as there's like as long as there is some complexity and structure and skill built into it, it's something that I can appreciate, at least the existence of, that there are people out there who appreciate it. I don't begrudge the existence of those of those genres. So I'm a little bit more of an apologist for the modern art side of things, or at least say, acknowledge like, okay, yeah, a lot of it is bad, but there's some good stuff there too.
That would be my approach. I think if I went to a modern art museum, I probably would hate it. I would probably hate everything there. It kind of has to catch me off guard.
Okay.
And when I'm caught off guard, it can be quite striking, but it's...
yeah, you know, in a way, yeah, I wonder if modern art museums are the most, are the best way to be exposed to them, because it seems like there is an element of kind of that putting you off kilter a little bit, not necessarily shock, but just kind of making you step outside of your usual frame a little bit, where when you go to a modern art museum, you're kind of expecting that already, so maybe it doesn't have the same effect. I'm talking about that as a total amateur, but anyway, that's just something I'll have to think more about. Whereas if, yeah, you just open it up and see it, and it's like, whoa, you're not expecting that, and then it has more of that effect. Okay, so modern art, we give modern art another lease on life. We're not going to condemn it to oblivion yet. We'll let it defend itself to be judged later. Cool. All right. Well, anything else?
I think that's it. I think we're good.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd. It was fun.
All right. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye.